According to biology, women are pulled to look for certain things in men. But what are those things exactly? I've worked with hundreds of men over 40 who are lonely, unhappy, depressed, and full of regret over marriages that end in divorce or never happened. And so many of these things could have been avoided if they knew a few simple facts about women's psychology. So here are the 11 things that men with the most successful relationships know that you don't. Now, these points work, but pay attention to detail, because if you use them wrong, well, you could become an incel. Which brings me to my first point. Women need connection. The problems in heterosexual relationships don't stem so much from their differences. They are more often a result of men assuming women are like men and women assuming men are like women. But nothing could be further from the truth. Couples often bridge the gap by being careful with their words or learning to mirror one another. But these strategies can frustrate and upset many couples because they only address superficial misunderstandings and don't get into the deep-seated misunderstandings that occur between men and women. One of the most important things that women don't necessarily understand about men is how sometimes they might be scared of women in intimate relationships. And one of the most important things that men do not understand about women is that what most of women do in relationships reflects their efforts to get closer and feel more connected. In some relationships, women often feel dissatisfied with the level of intimacy that they have with their partner, and they tend to approach their partners with ideas around how they could get even closer or spend more time together, saying things like, well, I wish you'd open up and tell me more about what's going on with you. The problem with this is that men are often taught to feel responsible for women. So whenever a woman expresses any kind of unhappiness, men often hear that as a criticism, as an indication of their inadequacy as a man. And not surprisingly, men often respond by withdrawing in order to protect themselves. And women often interpret a man's withdrawal as a lack of interest, so they get even more emotional and pursue their partner even more, which of course only leads to men withdrawing even further, until the couple is locked into this escalating pattern that leaves each of them feeling frustrated and alone. But couples can break out of this pattern and get to a much deeper and more satisfying connection with their partner if both the male and the female are willing to do so. For women, understanding that their partner may not be withdrawing out of lack of interest, but because he's afraid of getting it wrong. And for men, they can do their part by resisting the temptation to withdraw and learning how to hang in there emotionally so that they and their partner can talk these things through. In order to learn not to withdraw as a defense, men need to also learn to engage with their emotions a little bit more appropriately, becoming much more comfortable with conflict and uncomfortable emotional states. And if we can learn to see conflict as an opportunity rather than a threat or fear of losing the relationship as a consequence to engaging in conflict, this can ultimately alleviate the withdrawal fears and the deep-seated belief that somebody will abandon them. And this all leads into point 11, how to turn on her sex drive. But be patient, I'll get there, you filthy animals. Which ultimately leads me to my next point. Have you ever wondered why women seem much more emotional? Why they might overthink everything, need more emotional reassurance, or seem to react strongly to certain situations? Well, my friend, it's not them just being dramatic. It's about personality dimensions, specifically a trait called neuroticism. Now, neuroticism is a really fancy way of saying how emotionally reactive somebody is. It includes things like anxiety, mood swings, and being much more sensitive to stress. And guess what? Research shows that women on average are much higher in neuroticism than men. Now, before you guys freak out, this does not mean all women are emotional roller coasters, or that men don't feel their emotions at all. It's just a behavioral pattern due to a psychological dimension that is much higher in women than it is in men most of the time. So how does neuroticism show up? Well, it's those times when a woman might react to something severely while you see it as insignificant, or where she's overthinking and anxious about things going wrong, whereas you feel like everything's going right. Maybe she's even asking for more reassurance. Do you still love me? Are we okay? Even when to you, everything seems fine. What's really happening is that her brain is wired to respond more emotionally to stress and uncertainty. Now, here's where things get tricky. A lot of men see this as she's being too emotional or always overreacting. And you might feel frustrated and think, why is she getting upset over something so small? What you need to understand is that it's not small to her. Her brain is processing it at a much bigger way. Well, what's the solution here then? It's much more simple than you'd think. First, don't try to fix everything. A lot of men want to just swoop in and solve the problem. But what women really need is for you to shut up, listen, and validate their feelings. Just saying something like, I can see this is really stressing you out, can go a really long way. Second, reassurance is your best friend. When she asks, Are we okay? Instead of getting annoyed or reactive, offer some reassurance. This builds emotional safety, and the more secure that she feels, the less that she'll need to count on your reassurance. Now, as a side note, I gotta say, I hate using terms like masculine energy and feminine energy, but let's face it, they're everywhere. So relevant to this topic, I feel like we need to dive into what people actually mean when they use these terms. And for you to be able to understand them, it actually will help significantly improve your relationship. When people talk about masculine energy, they're typically talking about structure, order, and problem solving. It's the let's fix this mindset. On the flip side, feminine energy is described as being more fluid, emotional, and well, chaotic. And I don't mean chaos in a bad way. It's just less linear and more about feeling moment to moment. Now, do I love these labels? Not really. But this is ultimately why we even have these terms like feminine energy. It's about how we process and manifest emotions differently. Feminine energy, again, oriented towards something of chaos, means that emotions can feel like a whirlwind, shifting from joy to sadness to frustration in a matter of minutes. It's not necessarily about being unpredictable. It's about being deeply connected to what's happening in the moment. The masculine, on the other hand, leads towards stability with order, structure, and problem solving. So if you're a guy, then you might lean into thinking, I need to fix this emotional chaos. But again, you need to understand that women ultimately process emotions differently, and trying to fix their feelings like they're broken is the wrong way to go. One big mistake that men will make is trying to tell women how to feel, or trying to put their emotions in a box. And that is a big no. Again, when a woman is expressing her emotions, it is not a problem to be solved. It's more about experiencing the moment for what it is and allowing her to process in her own way. She's not looking for you to fix the problem. She's looking for a space to feel heard, seen, and validated. So don't tell her to calm down or that she's overreacting. That's like pouring more gasoline on a fire. And for men who struggle to understand their female counterparts' emotions, here's something that will solve a lot of your frustration. Do not internalize her emotions. Just because she's upset or feeling overwhelmed doesn't necessarily mean it's about you or something that you did. And if you're somebody with an anxious attachment style, you might believe that her ebbs and flows in emotion mean that the relationship is at risk, or that you've done something wrong. Understanding that women are much more emotionally expressive, and sometimes she's just processing a bunch of shit that's going on in her life, can help you understand that it's not always about you, or something in the container of your relationship. So aim to avoid the space of what did I do? I'm always doing something wrong. She's upset with me again. And just aim to listen and be supportive as best you can. Now, when emotions are really high, what can you do tactically to help her calm down a little bit? Let's talk about 3 things that work wonders. 1, affection. Physical affection is huge. Hug her, hold her hand. Even the smallest of a gentle touch can make her feel much more secure, calming her down and ultimately making her feel safe. Oftentimes, she just needs to feel close to you, and your physical affection can help bridge that gap. Number 2, words of affirmation. Tell her that she's valued, that she's loved, that everything is okay, and ultimately that you're there for her. Little things like literally saying, I am here for you, or you're doing great, can work wonders, and they'll make a huge difference. And number 3, and most importantly, make her feel secure. If you can create a sense of security, whether it's through your words or your actions, making sure that she knows no matter what, you've got her back, that literally, for women, is pretty much everything. Which brings me to another personality dimension that's chronically overlooked in relationships: agreeableness. And this plays a large role in how women communicate and behave, and it's one that a lot of men just misunderstand. Agreeableness is basically how somebody values cooperation, harmony, and ultimately empathy. And people high in agreeableness, like women, are likely to put others' needs first and also avoid any ounce of conflict because they care a lot about keeping the peace. And this for women means that they're more nurturing, kind, and willing to compromise. But if you're not aware of this dimension, you might misinterpret some of these behaviors. If she's trying to smooth things over, she's not necessarily being passive. She's just naturally inclined to keep the peace. And this is why she might say, it's fine, I'm fine, even when things are actually bothering her. She's trying to avoid conflict or avoid fighting with you and aim to keep the peace so that things are harmonious. Now, here's where men tend to misunderstand this. You might think that just because she's avoiding conflict, that she agrees with everything that you're actually doing, where she might actually have strong feelings and it may not ultimately be okay. Women who are really high in agreeableness aren't going to feel comfortable addressing their concerns or voicing their frustrations like men do. She's likely considering your feelings and the relationship as a whole. So when she says things like, I'm fine, it may be that she doesn't want to argue about this right now, or that in regard to the context of everything that she's considering, to her, it may not be that big of a deal or not worth the argument that it could bring. And this can also lead to a huge miscommunication if you just take her words at face value. Just because she's not actively pushing back doesn't mean that everything is okay. So how the heck do you handle this dynamic? The key is not to just assume that because she says everything is fine, that everything is fine. Instead, what you want to do is create a safe space for her to actually express what's going on with her. In order to do this, you want to frame the response kind of like this. I know you said that everything is fine, but are you sure? Or how are you feeling about this? You just want to let her know that her feelings do matter and that she doesn't always have to keep the peace. The second thing that's really important is not to mistake her agreeableness for a weakness. Just because she's willing to compromise more often doesn't mean that she doesn't have a strong perspective. And if you allow her the space to express her opinions while also respecting her, it will always lead to a peaceful outcome, even if you guys do disagree. Now, if you want to dig a little bit deeper here and actually support somebody who you know is highly agreeable and also reserves themselves when it comes to expressing their emotions or opinions, then here's what you need to do. Let her know that you want to understand where she's coming from, even if you guys ultimately end up disagreeing. Just opening a space to be able to feel understood can create a deeper level of connection and intimacy in the relationship, while also alleviating the fear that if she does bring up a concern, it's going to result in a conflict. Number two, make sure that you put in appreciation for when she does compromise or you know she's biting her tongue. Many people will take this for granted, but if you had to choose between somebody who's willing to think outside of just their perspective lens and also willing to compromise along the way, it's much better than being in a place where you're constantly fighting with somebody who always has to be right. Now, the last thing that's really important to understand is if you have a partner who's really high in agreeableness, one of the reasons that they will bite their tongue or reserve their opinions is because they tend to catastrophize the outcome of what if we do fight. And oftentimes this stems from a core belief or fear of abandonment. And so if you want somebody to open up about their inner world or the things that are going on with them, while also alleviating the fear that they have around being abandoned in the relationship because you got into an argument, make sure that you open the conversation, letting them know, I know you're upset, I know you've got some opinions, I'd love to understand them, and also understand that even if we do disagree here, it doesn't mean that everything's gonna blow up. Making it clear that disagreements don't end the relationship creates a safe space for different opinions, and you'll help her feel more comfortable being direct, understanding that it's not going to completely disrupt the peace. Which brings me to my next point. When we talk about security in a relationship, we're talking about a space where your partner feels safe physically, mentally, and emotionally. And for women, this need for security tends to be a bit more pronounced. It's not just about knowing that you won't walk away. It's also about understanding that she's safe to express herself emotionally without the judgment. The protection and security isn't just about protecting her from the outside world, but from emotional harm within the relationship. And this can look like her asking questions about where you guys stand, asking about your personal commitment, or needing even more physical affection. And you might notice that she seeks consistency in this. She wants to know that you're dependable and there for her, even when things get tough. Now, this isn't about being needy. It's about her making sure that the foundation in which you're building your relationship on is solid. Now, here's where men can misunderstand the need for security. If she's asking you for reassurance or wanting more affection, you might think, why is she being clingy? Or doesn't she trust me? But here's the truth. It's not necessarily about you not doing enough. It's about her need to feel safe and connected to you. Sometimes men think, but I've already told her I love her already. What more does she need? But love and security are things that need to be consistently reinforced. It's not a one and done kind of deal. So how should you respond when she's seeking more connection or security in your relationship? First off, don't get defensive. When she's asking for reassurance, it's not necessarily that she's doubting you. It's about her trying to receive a need of being connected. So instead of saying, I've already told you this, try saying, I'm here and I always will be. This little simple affirmation can go a long frickin' way. Number two, be consistent. If you say you're gonna be there, be there. If you promise her something, follow through. Consistency builds trust, and trust ultimately builds security. This means showing up both physically and emotionally, day after day after day. Number three, physical affection. Another way to help her feel even more secure is through showing her physical affection. Sometimes this is just holding her hand, giving her a hug, or a gentle touch, and this will help her feel even more grounded in your relationship. Physical presence is a form of emotional security. Now, let's talk about a few ways that you can build this without necessarily waiting for her to ask for you to give it to her. Number one, give her reassurance without her needing to ask you for it. Be proactive and let her know that you value her and the relationship that you're in together. Little affirmations like I love you or I appreciate you, again, they'll go a long way, and this will give her the security that she needs without her having to seek it out. Number two, be present especially in emotional conversations. Don't wait for her to ask if everything is okay. Be proactive and open the door to talk about your relationship and the emotional intimacy that you guys have. Put the phone away, get off your social media, look her in the eye, and really listen. This will tell her that what she's expressing is safe with you and you did receive it, and also help her feel more secure and valued without her needing to seek that out. And number 3, offer stability. And no, this isn't just about finances and physical safety. It's emotional. Offer your stable and consistent presence to her. If she knows that she can count on you no matter what, she'll feel way more secure, whether it's following through on the small promises or just being a rock when things get really tough. Stability is key. So the next time you notice she's looking for reassurance or needing a little bit more attention, remember, it's not about you failing. It's about her need to feel safe and secure in your relationship. And you can offer that emotional security by being consistent, affectionate, reassuring, and present. It's not complicated, but it does make a world of a difference. Which brings me to my next point. Emotional intelligence is a prerequisite of a relationship. And this is a crucial trait specifically for men that want to be in an intimate relationship. Women want a man who can understand and manage not only his emotions, but also recognize and respond to hers. And this is the foundation of a healthy relationship dynamic. When we talk about emotional intelligence in a relationship, it's about being able to recognize, understand, and manage emotions, your own and your partner's, knowing when to listen, when to empathize, and when to offer support. And for women, it shows that you care, you are present, and you're willing to connect. Remember, you don't need to solve every problem immediately. It's about feeling understood, not fixed. And here's what a lot of guys get wrong. You think emotional intelligence is knowing exactly what to say or how to fix it, but that's not what it's about at all. So here are a few ways you can practice emotional intelligence and really actually connect with your partner. 1, put the distractions away when you're having a conversation and actually focus on what she's saying. Now, if you want to build this skill, then one of the best things that you can do is actually listen to what they said and then repeat it back to them to make sure that you understood what was being shared. Number 2, relevant to that, is asking open-ended questions. Instead of assuming that you know why she's doing what she's doing, or that you know the answer to how to solve this problem, or that she even wants you to solve it, ask questions like, how are you feeling? How can I support you right now? And this invites her to share more openly and lets her know that you actually do care about her inner world. And number 3, most importantly, practice some empathy. Put yourself in her shoes. How would you feel within this situation? What would you need if you were feeling that way? When you respond from a place of empathy, it shows her that you genuinely care. And again, 99.9% of what women do is ultimately to feel connected to you. Which brings me to my next point. We go from emotional and soft to what women also crave, which is confident men. And no, I'm not talking about this fake bravado, being the loudest guy in the room kind of thing, but real confidence is something that women do crave in a partner. And most men misunderstand what this actually looks like. So let's dive into what women actually look for when they say they want a confident man and how this actually looks in reality. Again, this is not about being arrogant or cocky. It's about self-assurance, reliability, knowing your value without necessarily always having to prove it. It's about walking into a room and being the quiet and confident guy, not the loudest guy in the room. And this signals that you are both capable and secure, both with yourself and, relevant to this, in a relationship. Remember that true confidence is steady, not loud, and you need to have a belief in your own abilities, handling challenges without getting rattled, and staying very grounded even when things don't go your way. So how does this actually show up in a relationship? It's about being decisive without being controlling, and being emotionally stable, not overreacting to problems. And most importantly, it's about taking responsibility, owning your successes and failures without making excuses. And for women, and why we crave this, is because confidence equals security. It shows her that you can handle life's challenges, and it makes her feel more safe and supported. It's about knowing who you are and ultimately where you're going. And again, to the guys that think you've got to be the loudest, flashiest thing in the room, that's insecurity wrapped in bravado. Real confidence doesn't have to be constantly validated. And if you're constantly seeking approval from others, you're not actually confident. And as a side note, it's somewhat insufferable. Another mistake regarding confidence and the things that it entails is a lot of men think that it involves no levels of vulnerability. But confidence isn't about never having fears or doubts. It's about how you navigate the presence of those things. Can you face challenges without falling apart? And can you take feedback without getting defensive? So how do you develop confidence? The real levels of confidence, the kind that women want. Well, it starts with competence, which is my next point. Confidence comes from being good at something, whether it's your job, a skill, or handling life's challenges. The more you succeed in real, tangible ways, the more confident you become. Competence builds confidence. So if you're not confident, ask yourself, have you actually gone out into the world and achieved anything? Whether it's mastering a trade, excelling in your career, learning how to handle difficulties with grace, cultivating strong relationships and connections, confidence is a byproduct of competence. You do not need to be perfect, but you do need to be capable. And it also means that you have to have the ability to make decisions and take action. Women appreciate and crave a man who can lead without being overbearing. It's about being decisive while also respecting her input and perspective. And one of the biggest signs of this, just relative to what you can observe in people, is emotional stability. When couples get into arguments, one of the things that I'm always looking at is how quickly can they come back to baseline. You want somebody who can get into a heightened state of negative emotion and has the emotional wherewithal to be able to come back down in a relatively acute period of time. If you've ever dated somebody who doesn't have this, you'll see an argument carry out for 3, 4, 5, even a week at a time. And for most people, it's really difficult to manage conflict when you know, or even openly express how you feel, if you know this person is going to take it all the way to the extreme and then hold it against you for the next 7 days. Women need to know when things get tough that you have the ability to come back to a relationship at the foundation. And lastly, confidence and competence do not necessarily mean that everything is always fine. Sometimes confidence means expressing when you're feeling some type of way or admitting that you don't actually have all the answers. Being vulnerable, when appropriate, shows strength, not weakness. As a side note, it's okay to ask for support, and most women will respect that, honestly. Now we're going to touch on something a bit controversial, but very important nonetheless. Women respect men who have a capacity for violence. Now, before you jump to conclusions, let me explain. It's not about necessarily being violent, but having the ability to stand up, to protect, and control that strength. And if you've ever dated a woman, you know that we will test you in this domain constantly. And men, most of the time, have no idea what's actually going on here. Now, when I say capacity for violence, what I do not mean is that you're aggressive or abusive. It's about having the ability to defend yourself and your loved ones when necessary. It's about strength, self-control, and discipline. And a man who has this capacity shows that he can stand his ground, has the ability to protect, and also understands when to use this, and on the contrary, when to hold back. And the capacity for this signals to women that you're capable of protecting her, handling threats, and potentially keeping your family safe, while also having the restraint to not let that go unchecked. But here's the part that many men miss. Remember I said women often test this domain? It's subtle, but it's happening all the time. And these tests on the women's part aren't even conscious, but they are real. It can be things like teasing, challenging your decisions, or pushing your boundaries to see how you respond. She's testing you not in a way where she wants you to explode, but what she's really looking for is if you can stay calm, assert your boundaries, and control yourself. And if you pass this test by maintaining calm authority, you gain her respect. And if you fail by either not standing up for yourself or becoming volatile, well, you lose it. Now, here's where a lot of men go wrong. Some guys think that in this scenario, the key is to be passive. Just simply avoid conflict at all costs. But if you're too passive, she's going to assume that you don't have the capacity for violence, aka you can't even stand up for yourself, which tells her that you don't have the capacity to stand up for her either. So being passive doesn't work. On the flip side, some men think that the answer is to just be aggressive, to meet every single challenge with force and anger. But women will lose respect for you even faster if you can't control your emotions or your anger. She's not looking for brute force, she's looking for controlled power. So how would you know that you have this capacity for strength without being aggressive? Well, it starts with control and assertiveness. If she challenges you, whether it's through playful teasing or pushing your boundaries, stay calm, but also direct in asserting your boundaries and holding them up. Let her know what is acceptable and what is not, without getting angry, reactive, or passive-aggressive. Calm authority is key. Number 2, you need to stay calm when conflict arises. Don't allow your anger or other emotions to completely take over. The ability to stay calm, focused, and in control during high-pressure situations shows a lot of strength. And women do respect men who can handle conflict without flying off the handle. What's also really important to note is that being strong means knowing when to stand your ground and when to let things go. Not every single test or conflict needs to turn into a power struggle. You need to know which battles to pick and which ones are worth fighting, while also having the wisdom to avoid unnecessary conflict. A couple of other really important things to note here: don't back down, but don't overreact. When she pushes your boundaries, don't ignore it, but don't lash out either. A simple, calm, and controlled response is enough, and it shows that you're in control and not easily rattled. It's also important for you to use strength as protection, not intimidation. It should make your partner feel protected, not threatened. She needs to know that you are capable, but would never ever use that against her. And if you can do that, you are absolutely passing the test. And lastly, the worst thing you can do is lose your fucking temper, which leads me nicely into my next point, emotional stability. This is about keeping your cool no matter what life throws at you. It's about being steady, patient, and resilient in stressful situations. Women need to see this in you because she needs to know that you're reliable and can handle the challenges that will inevitably come without completely falling apart. This doesn't mean that you don't feel emotions, okay? You're not a rock. But what it does mean is that you don't allow them to get the best of you. Women do not want men who run from problems, whether it is by ignoring them, walking out, or refusing to engage. But they also don't want somebody who flies off the freaking handle, screaming, name-calling, or being passive-aggressive. These behaviors show a lack of control and ultimately immaturity. Now, if we want to talk about red flags in behaviors, well, I'm gonna list a few here. Number one, avoidance, aka avoiding the conflict or your partner entirely. If you walk away every single time that things get tough, all you're telling her is that you can't handle this relationship, and ultimately that you're not trustworthy when it comes to navigating really hard life stuff. Number two, stonewalling or completely shutting down. If you're somebody who gives your partner the silent treatment, just understand that this is going to drive a very toxic dynamic. It makes her feel like her emotions don't matter, and it's also a sign that you're emotionally unavailable, which will kill your connection. Number three is name calling or attacking somebody's character. It shows a large lack of emotional control and ultimately respect. And women will lose trust and respect in their partner if they act out this way. Which leads me to number four, screaming and yelling. We are not children. Raising your voice and yelling doesn't make you strong. It makes you look out of control and somehow entitled. Emotional stability means that you have the capacity to express yourself without resorting to screaming and yelling. And most importantly, if you have an allergy to responsibility, blaming everybody but yourself for your problems, or refusing to take accountability, screams instability. And a man who can't take responsibility for his actions or emotions is not somebody that a woman can rely on. Now, a good sign of returning back to baseline is communication, which brings us right to my next point. Communication. Well, good communication. Men who are assertive without being aggressive shows that they have the capacity to actually discuss a problem. If they can acknowledge their own perception without losing perspective, it dissipates conflict to an extent. When things get heated, you need to learn to take a break and slow down. Patience is the biggest indicator of emotional stability, so don't rush to react. The more time that you give yourself to think, the more control that you have. Now, as a side note, this does not mean tell somebody that you need to take space or completely just exit the room without saying anything. What's really important relative to communication is your ability to say, I really need some time to think this through, but I'm coming back and we will talk about this. Don't leave without saying anything. This is not an Irish goodbye. The next thing that you need to focus on is communicating without shutting down. If something is bothering you, don't avoid it. What you resist in a relationship will persist. And this is why 70% of conflicts are never really resolved. If you can communicate clearly and honestly, well, now we're getting somewhere. And women will respect men who can talk through uncomfortable conversations or topics without retreating or isolating. The next point relative to good communication is responsibility for your actions and your emotions. If you mess up, own it. If you're feeling something, express it in a healthy way. And don't blame somebody else for your behavior. Accountability shows a ton of emotional maturity, and it's something that tells women that they can overcome hardship with you. Now to the topic of conversation that most men get wrong when they really want to get it right. Sexual desire. A lot of men think they know what turns a woman on, but they're often missing the key ingredient. So if you've ever wondered why she's pulling away, or why her desire for you seems low, then this one's for you. The number one thing men often miss or get confused is a woman's sexual drive, and it's because it's directly connected to her emotional state. It's not just about physical attraction or the moment. It's ultimately how emotionally connected and safe she feels with you. So if she's not emotionally fulfilled, her desires will start to fade, no matter how good things might be physically. For women, emotional needs are deeply tied to physical ones. And if you're not meeting her emotional needs, aka making her feel secure, validated, and understood, her sex drive will take a backseat. It's really that simple. But a lot of men think that a woman's sex drive works the same way that theirs does. More physical, more about the moment. But here's the truth. For women, emotional fulfillment plays a huge role. So if you're only focusing on the physical aspects of your relationship without taking care of her emotional needs, well, you're not gonna get what you really want. You know what I'm saying? If she feels disconnected from you, misunderstood, or like her feelings aren't a priority, she's going to lose interest in being intimate with you. Because when she doesn't feel secure in the relationship or emotionally secure, the physical connection piece becomes much harder to maintain. So what's the solution here? How do you reignite someone's sexual appetite? It all comes down to where we started in this conversation. connection. If you want to feed her sexual desire, start by meeting her emotional needs. Make her feel valued, understood, and secure ultimately in the relationship. This means building the emotional connection in the time that you guys spend together talking about your relationship. Research suggests that spending at least 90 minutes together a week, not talking about life, not talking about work, not talking about all the gossipy bullshit stuff, but actually talking about where you're at in your relationship, what you appreciate, and where you want to go together, builds intimacy. The second thing is make her feel safe. Most men want a woman who can just let go. But it's very difficult to let go if you don't know how stable the ground is that you're standing on. Her ability to connect with you will ride on how safe and secure she feels with you and in that relationship, ultimately knowing that it's something that's going to last more than 5 minutes. She needs to know that it's not just about the sex. She needs to know that it's just not about the thrill or the novelty, that there's actual meaning to what it is that you guys are doing. She needs to know that you've got her back, no matter what. It's also about understanding that affection isn't just about physical intimacy in the bedroom. Hug her, hold her hand, give her a kiss, words of affirmation. All of these small gestures and physical affection over time throughout the day create a sense of intimacy that leads to a stronger sexual desire. And number 4, and this is probably the most important part of what I'm saying, be consistent in your actions. Consistency builds trust, and trust is a huge piece of emotional fulfillment. If you say you're gonna do something, do it. If you make a promise, keep it. Because consistency in your actions reassures her that you're reliable. And if you're reliable, well, it helps her feel way more secure. So if you want to feed your partner's sexual appetite, it's not just about the bedroom. It's about how you treat her outside of it. Emotional fulfillment and connection are the keys that drive women in all of their behaviors in a relationship ultimately. And the more you meet her emotional needs, well, the more she will meet your physical ones. So this was the 11 things about women that men get wrong. And if you want to understand other behaviors that absolutely fuck relationships, then click this video and I'll see you there. If not, fuck off. Bye.